Hello, I'm Michael Mayer from VocalWisdom.com, and in this video I want to talk about fear. I consider fear to kind of be our main nemesis because fear can affect us in so many different ways. You know, most of us are aware of the most obvious form of fear that we might face, which is, performance anxiety, fear, stage fright, as it's often called. And this is a typical kind of fear of getting up in front of an audience, and this can affect you in any sort of performance. It could be, it doesn't have to be just like you're standing in front of a couple thousand people. It could be, you can feel this way in front of 100 people. You could feel this way even in front of one or two people, like in an audition or something like that. So that is a very common type of fear that we all need to learn how to address and deal with. But there's other fears that happen even earlier on our journey, before we even get to a stage or a performance. Just the fact that sometimes we have a fear, especially in more beginning stages, of just simply making any sound in front of anybody who can hear us. And this can be a real issue if you go to a lesson or go to work with somebody. We have to kind of overcome that fear and become comfortable singing with somebody, singing in front of somebody, so that they can give us feedback and help us improve. And the big thing with that is that if we can't figure out how to get comfortable singing in front of somebody else, it will usually make us not sound like ourselves. We may seem comfortable when we're by ourselves alone, and just kind of practicing or just singing on our own. And if we can't give that same example to the person that we're going to help us, they might not get an accurate representation of what you're doing. And so it's kind of like, the teacher can only teach based on what they observe, really. You can ask them questions about, when I'm alone, things are different and such, and maybe you can get some advice that way. But the fact still is that in a teaching position, you are always going by what you hear and see, what you can observe directly, and then giving feedback and mirroring back that to the singer, so that they can first realize what they're doing, and then try to figure out how things maybe could be functioning better, and what to do to make that happen. So that right there is, we might face that first step right away. Another type of situation that's similar to that, maybe not even going to a professional or going to a lesson, but in your own home. If you live in an apartment, or if you live in a home with other people, you may have a fear of somebody like that hearing you, and that can be a real challenge in itself, because if we're not comfortable making noise and having other people hear us, then again it will affect our ability to feel free to be expressive, because that's what we're doing with the voice. We're expressing vocally. So if we feel sort of like we're hiding, then we're not going to be functioning freely. And so we have to watch out for kind of restricting ourselves, instead of just being able to make a nice full sound and feel free to do whatever our voice is comfortable doing at that moment. We're going to progress, and a lot of this has to do with getting kind of okay with being vulnerable, because the voice especially is a very personal thing. And when we think of it as a voice, we don't necessarily think of it as a musical instrument. When you're playing a musical instrument, you can feel this way too. You kind of self-conscious about, sounding bad, but it's not as personal because it's not a part of you. So it's sometimes even more challenging because the voice is sort of like our identity. We feel like it is us. So if somebody rejects that, we're very vulnerable. And so we have to kind of come to grips with that situation, or else we're going to really kind of create a roadblock to our own progress. So that's one of the big challenges to deal with a form of fear. One that I observe in working with other people is, especially in the manner in how I approach the voice. As you may be familiar with my teaching, a big part of the situation is getting the voice itself to vibrate, to vocalize with a good, clean, clear, energized vibration. And sometimes people can be sort of fearful of actually using the voice. They think they might hurt themselves. They think it might be, well, that's the biggest thing, is that it's just various forms of fear of hurting their voice. And the thing is that we have to understand that the voice is meant to be active. That's what it is. It's just like any other sound producing instrument. It's meant to be and I can't imagine that anybody observes my demonstrations and says, "Oh, he's abusing his voice. It's so harsh and it's so, damaging. I will never do what he does." But yet, when I ask people to actually vocalize versus they sometimes act like they think that I'm asking them to abuse their voice. And that's a real problem, because if we don't, if we're afraid to use the voice, then we'll never actually get the voice functioning completely. And then we'll always either be pushing the breath, or we'll be squeezing the throat. See, this is what people have a hard time learning, and it's important to learn to distinguish. The voice is not the throat. The throat is what squeezes. The voice doesn't squeeze. The throat is what squeezes. So if we're tight, that's not a result of using the voice. That's a result of not using the voice, so that the throat then compensates by squeezing and constricting. So it actually is the opposite of what we might assume, that when we use the voice in a balanced, appropriate way, that keeps the throat open, so that it doesn't constrict. But if we force the breath and we try to use only our breath, or if we do things, but if we do things differently and try to ignore the voice, the natural behavior of the voice itself, then we're going to be kind of stuck. Because what is the voice? The voice is this little mechanism here in the neck that is the larynx, and this is made up of kind of a structure of cartilages, and it has basically two bands of tissue that are stretched across the airway, connected to a set of several different muscle groups, that the muscle groups control whether these two bands open or close or stretch or get shorter, all in kind of unconscious response to whatever it is we're wanting to do. If we breathe, these muscles open the two bands of tissue so that the air that we're breathing can go in and out through this opening very freely. So when we breathe, the vocal folds, these bands of tissue I'm talking about, open to allow the air to go through. When we don't breathe, they lay closed. They're similar to valves in our body, like in our heart. When the blood pumps, the valve opens. When the blood stops, the valve closes. And so that's what the voice, that's what the vocal folds inside the larynx are doing, is that when we breathe, they open. And when we don't breathe, they close. And that's the whole point of breath coordination, so that we can do what I call suspension, so that we can kind of remain in the inhale, so that we have air inside of us that will be useful to energize the vocalization, but we try to not actively breathe, actively exhale, because that will open the folds. And so when we stop breathing, they lay closed, and we really don't have much sensation of that. It's just a part of our natural functioning, just like our heart beats without us trying. The glottis opens and closes without us trying. We don't have to squeeze it to close it to get a good vocalization. We just need to kind of coordinate the breathing. See, we can stop after the inhale and be totally calm, totally relaxed. And then start the voice vibrating without any sort of harshness, violence, without actively pushing the breath out or exhaling or flowing the breath. It's a natural response when we want to say something. And that's all we have to do. And that's what I'm really, as a teacher, that's what I'm interested in helping people discover, is becoming sensitive and coordinated to being able to optimize that, make it, get it into a good condition, so that the vocal folds can actually do what other vibrating materials of other musical instruments do, which is resist some sort of force. The lips of the trumpet player resist the force of our breath. The strings on a guitar or violin, they're taut, so they resist the strumming, the picking, the bowing. Without that elastic resistance, that tautness, then there would be no vibration, because it requires that resistance. So the vocal folds stretch. When they don't stretch and start in close together from our breathing coordination, then if they open because we exhale, or if they stay slack because we're overly relaxed, we won't get a real vibration. We'll get something, but it's not anything we can really work with. So being afraid of using the voice, being afraid of not breathing, being afraid of doing the functional things that maybe feel unfamiliar, and that's kind of what it comes down to, is a fear of what's unfamiliar, because you've never done it before. You don't know what the outcome is going to be. But it really takes a lot to hurt the voice, and it usually takes an ongoing lack of care to really hurt the voice. So there's very little danger to just experimenting a little bit and trying to find your way through new experiences and new coordinations. As long as you have a sincere focus on vocalizing versus just beating up the voice, that's not anything that I would ever recommend. When we talk about using the voice, we're not talking about doing anything harshly. And one last fear that I observe that I want to address is the fear of what I guess we call Skype instruction. there seems, because teaching over Skype is kind of my primary mode of communication to the people that I work with. It's something that's important to me, and I find more often than I think really makes any sense, people having a fear of actually studying over the internet, and not being exactly in the same room with whoever you're working with. And that's a real, it's a shame actually, because people who feel that way are losing out on actually getting the experience of working with somebody that might be able to help them. That's just the reality, at least as I see it, because not everybody has all the same information. That should be obvious, but I guess sometimes maybe it's not. So you're not going to just find somebody who can help you necessarily in your local, within 10 miles of your home. So this fear of working on Skype or whatever, is really, it boggles my mind actually, because for me, I always was looking for, the information that would help me understand the things that I was trying to figure out when I was in the developmental stages. And I even worked with somebody over the telephone, because that was before Skype and before the internet. Before Skype started, I taught some people over the telephone. And it's because, when you find the information that you think can help you, then you want that. And sometimes the only way you can get it is either by traveling, which I did that also, or by doing it over communication service of some sort. That's just the way it is. So these are various forms of fear that we might find ourselves faced with, and so I wanted to address these. And the bottom line is whatever we're afraid of, fear is in our instinct to protect us from harm, protect us from being killed. We have a fear of falling off a cliff because that could cause us harm. We have a fear of a poisonous snake or a mountain lion, because these things could cause us harm. So fear in itself serves a very important purpose. But in our modern society, in our modern way of life, too often our fears are not real instinctive fears. There's actually none of the fears that I talked about here in this video really are legitimate in that sense that we're afraid of something that's actually going to cause us harm. We get up in front of an audience, even if we completely bomb, we're not actually, our life is not in danger, even though we often will have a physical and emotional reaction that is sort of like as if we were going to die. And the same thing in all the other situations that I talked about. We're not actually going to suffer physical harm that puts our life at risk, but we sort of act like that is the case. So we have to kind of learn how to look at what we're afraid of in a logical and bring it into sort of reality, because we sort of hide from it and we don't look at it directly and say, you know what, that's silly and there's nothing to be afraid of. We kind of hide from it so it stays affecting us and impeding our freedom to do what we want to do. So if there's something that you want to do and you have this fear that's holding you back, explore that idea of just looking at it directly and facing it. I like to say shine a light on it, because then when you take it out of the shadows, you realize it's nothing. And that is what will let you start to really take those steps forward and make your progress that you're wanting to. All right, so that's good for today. I hope that gives you at least something that will be beneficial, and we'll talk again soon. Thanks.